I just want to give you a sense of the landscape. We know you have to leave, and we are delighted that you came and could be with us for at least some time. So I would invite you to sort of share some opening remarks, after which I will begin to pose questions to our illustrious panel. Mark Morial, President of the National Urban League.
Thank you. Good morning, brothers and sisters.
Good morning.
Good morning, brothers and sisters.
Good morning.
A few acknowledgments. I'm truly honored to be here. I want to thank Ron Daniels. We owe Ron a debt of gratitude for his intellect, his hard work, and his never-say-quit approach to the issues that confront our communities across the nation. And Ron, I want to give you a round of applause this morning and ask everyone to give you a round of applause, because I know this has been certainly challenging and difficult. I also, as we wait on Mayor Baraka to come, I do want to acknowledge the death this week of Ken Gibson, the legendary first African-American mayor of Newark, elected in 1970, and also the third African-American mayor elected to a major American city, Dick Hatcher and Carl Stokes being first in 1967, and then Ken Gibson coming along certainly in 1970. So in that fact, for me and many of us, he was a part of that role model class, as was Johnny Ford, who was elected in 1972 as a mayor of Tuskegee, Alabama, a history maker. And Johnny, you're holding up the flag as all of these legends have been called home. So I do want to acknowledge you all and acknowledge that generation and acknowledge Mayor Gibson's presence and historic achievement in this city almost 50 years ago. I want to thank Kyle Williams of my staff for all of his work in assisting Ron and pulling this together today, and thank all of you who responded to the invitation that I sent to you or to your bosses or to the people you work with to consider attending this important conversation. And I also want to acknowledge my colleague here in Newark, in Essex County, Vivian Cox-Frazier, who is doing some very important work here in Newark, very important work to rebuild the community. And I know, Vivian, you'll have an opportunity today to talk about the work you're doing, the challenges you face, but the importance of the work you're doing. So let me just create a little bit of context and then make a few comments. I sure wish I had seen yesterday's presentation on what gentrification is. But here's the reality. I go to Washington, D.C. a lot. I see Washington, D.C. changing before our very eyes, being Manhattanized or San Franciscoized as the demographics of that city change rapidly. I see Atlanta, Georgia, this incredible capital of the New South, its demographics changing rapidly. I see my hometown of New Orleans, which lost over 100,000 residents displaced who never returned post-Katrina. And the seeds of gentrification and the increase in the cost of housing and the displacement of people is evident in many quarters of that community. We've got to understand the other side of this coin is that while Washington, D.C. has lost African-American population, Prince George's County has emerged as an African-American majority county in the state of Maryland. The Northern Virginia suburbs now have a larger African-American population than ever before. Montgomery County, which of course is an upper income dominated county, also has a larger African-American population than ever before. Part of our discussion about our people and about our future necessarily in the 21st century has to involve those communities, has to involve the communities to which we have been displaced. And we fled, in many respects, what has occurred is people have moved to the suburbs, African Americans, because they've been displaced, but the cost of housing being less and a whole host of factors. In New Orleans, the West Bank, which is partially in Orleans Parish and partially in Jefferson Parish, is emerging as a community that may be 40 to 50% African American and Latino, when it was once 80 to 90% white community. We see this before our eyes. So we have to talk about displacement and gentrification, but we also have to talk about the places to where we have been displaced, so that the repeat of redlining and disinvestment, the policy starts following us. It goes from point A to point B because the policy is all about us. So our analysis and our thought processes have to be broad. I've been following in St. Louis, where now there is a move to merge the city government and the county government, and we know the effect of that will be to dilute African American political power. Straight and simple, no matter what arguments people make, that will be the effect of it. It will diminish, indeed, our power. So this discussion has economic dimensions, it has political dimensions. What we must do in the 21st century is that we have to align the power of activism with the power of elected officials and public policy to try to change the arc. One standing alone isn't enough. You can't have activism without a response inside the system to change public policy. You can't have, and you will not achieve change inside the system without community activism on the outside of the system. And we've got to understand that these strategies, Ron, are not in conflict with each other. That they are aligned, if we align them and if we understand what they are, and if we, and I hope what comes out of this, I know that Mayor Baraka has promulgated here in Newark a series of inclusionary zoning and equitable development initiatives. Those of you who are in cities where we have political influence need to bring those policies, those types of policies, back to your cities. We have to counteract this with policy responses, with equitable development, with inclusionary zoning. When I took office as mayor of New Orleans in 1994, the first thing I did was I grabbed control of the city's capital budget, which is the money used for schools and parks and playgrounds and the like. I took control of it. I forced the bureaucrats who ran the program to give me an analysis, neighborhood by neighborhood, where money had been spent over the last 20 years and where unspent money was going to be spent. The map told the story. It told the story. The wealthier neighborhoods, the better off neighborhoods, were the recipients of a disproportionate share of street repair work, park improvements, playground improvements, and the like. And I altered that arc. I changed the way those capital dollars were spent. I did the same thing with the Community Development Block Grant Program. I took control of it. And I said, where are we spending money? Who are we spending money with? What neighborhoods are we spending money in? And change the arc of that. An elected official, I had come from the community. I did not need an activist to tell me to do that. I felt that's why I was elected. And by doing so, we were able to shift, because the idea was, if I've got the power to determine public investment, I'm going to make sure that the public investment takes place on an equitable basis, And by mapping things, it just told the story. The map didn't lie once you mapped the information out. It was not a debate. It was not an argument. It was clear that that was the case. I identify that because in activists, we have to pay attention to the capital budget of a city. We have to pay attention to the distribution of community development block grant funds by the city. Who gets it? What neighborhoods do they serve? With the capital budget, who in fact is the recipient of those capital dollars? What parks, which playgrounds, which streets? I took control of the affordable housing program and did the exact same thing and came up with target neighborhoods where we were going to over-invest in order to confront the problem. So inside of a municipal government, the reason why I want to focus on municipal governments is because in America today, where black political power is most pronounced is in municipal governments. We either have African-American majorities, we have African-American mayors, or we have enough influence within the legislative branch, the city councils. If those elected officials are woke, if those elected officials are, if they understand why they were elected. So one of the roles of activists sometimes is to remind people why they were elected, what they were elected to do, and what it is they ought to do. And so we have to really, really focus, I think, on municipal governments, Ron, and the leverage that they have, both through the powers of zoning, the distribution of capital budgets, CBDG dollars, in terms of refocusing those investments on communities that have been locked out and left out. It was interesting. People would come to budget hearings for the operating budget, and it would be nice. It was a old-fashioned, good old-fashioned public hearing. A lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, a lot of passion. Then the capital budget would come up. Anybody here to talk? Going once, going twice, boom. And then $250 to $300 million had moved just like that, right? Because people said, the capital budget, what is that all about? We had to change the paradigm from the inside on that. And I offer it as a thought process that can begin tomorrow in every single community. Put transparency over the capital budget, put transparency over the CBDG program, what type of projects, where's the money being spent, and then the second thing is, who's the money being spent with? Is it being spent with African-American contractors? Is it being spent by utilization of African-American design professionals? Does the city have a policy to do that? We did that too. I signed an executive order the first year I was in office. I was impatient. I wasn't waiting on the city council. I just said, I'm signing an executive order and we're gonna start doing 35% of our business with African-American contractors, and we're gonna start it tomorrow. And this is the way this is gonna be. So it's important to understand the levers available inside of city government, but the role of activists is important to raise the question, to ask for transparency, to be watchers of the budgetary processes so that the neighborhoods are not locked out and left out. Every city has a capital budget of some form or some fashion. A couple of other things I want to talk about is that bears, and these are things, I just think from a list standpoint, putting them down for us to pay attention to. This Opportunity Zone program. So this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, if deployed correctly, it could have a benefit in our community. On the other hand, if deployed improperly, it is a tool of further gentrification. Now, what can we do? We are not going to get, I don't think, a set of regulatory guardrails out of this Department of Treasury in Washington, D.C. We're not going to get it. But every single city government, every single mayor, city council, and planning board can promulgate a policy and say, if you're going to use ozone money or ozone investments, and we're going to give you a building permit, we're going to give you a zoning waiver, we're going to give you restoration tax abatement, we're going to give you low-income housing tax credits. Here are the conditions. that we want you to meet. That has to happen at the local level by ordinance, by executive order, by municipal policy. And every single city ought to say, yes, this can be a benefit if the proper guardrails and conditions are met. So you want to build housing, you have to have affordable housing. You want to build certain types of things, we're going to require a community benefits agreement to benefit the community. We're going to require you to tell us how you're going to utilize minority contractors and how people in the community are going to get the jobs. See, we have to lean hard into the place where we have influence, the places where we have power. So this Opportunity Zone program, is begging for cities to take a position, and it's a position that says we want the investment, but we want it under the right sets of conditions. So the final thing I'm going to share with you this morning, because I'm going to yield to Mayor Baraka as he walks in, is that the National Urban League, we have promulgated our own Main Street Marshall Plan, which we released last year. This is a $2 trillion plan that calls for the federal government to invest $2 trillion over the next 10 years, next 5 years, $1 trillion on physical infrastructure in urban communities, the other $1 trillion on human infrastructure, education, workforce development, and the like. This plan, $2 trillion, is a plan that we have been strongly advocating for. This is available to you online. Let me give you the number. I got asked when we introduced this plan, where are you going to get $2 trillion? That tax cut they passed is scheduled to cost $1.9 trillion. I'll take that money and put it here. See, people try to psych you out by saying, oh, we can't afford that. Yet they go and put $2 trillion on what is their priority. What is their priority? So I offer this plan to you as a guide. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'm going to yield to you, Ron, so you can introduce Mayor Baraka.
All right, let's give it up for President Mark Morial, National Urban League. Exceptional thoughts. And a round of applause for our host, the Honorable Roz J. Baraka. Y'all can do better than that. Our host, the Honorable Roz J. Baraka. So I briefed the mayor in terms of how we're going to proceed. So he's going to sort of listen as we pose some questions, and then he'll make his observations and offer his questions as well. We know that President Morial will have to leave, and when you leave, we'll understand. What I want to do is to start with our elected official side, or those who are representing SANE. And I want to start with, by the way, our narrative, overarching sort of points of reference are the narrative. What is happening in our communities, number one. Number two, what are the causative factors? And number three, what are the action items that we need to be taking? I want to really start on the narrative side because Mayor Pro Tem Shirley Green, I want you to talk about what's happening and what gentrification looks like in the community that you're working in. And by the way, we want to be relatively brief, get it out in a succinct way, because there'll be opportunities for questions and answers as well. But we thank you so much for coming and being with us.
Thank you. I'm from Whitesboro, New Jersey. That's at the end of New Jersey, surrounded by, there's only one pocket of African Americans, which is Whitesboro. You have a population around 2,000. Now, the gentrification, from what I see, didn't just start last year. It started 30 years ago when 35 years when I moved to that area of the South. And by this, I'm saying when we moved there, we went in, we had a construction company, that's with the yellow backhoes and whatever. We noticed the problems at that point. We were the only African-American company that came down in that area with that sort of machines. From that point, different things have been going on. So we had to get diversified. We wind up buying housing, real estate to offset some of what was going on. In the meantime, but everything you touched, you had these people going behind you, creating issues for you, whether you were, which you didn't do, but they created things that you did. We were the only company pretty much in that whole area. We used to have home-based businesses, you know. We did asphalt and driveways, knocking down trees. Other people did the concrete work, but they were home-based businesses. After they, you know, got into some run and some stay and say, well, I'll figure it out. Well, I'm the figure-it-out person. So we wind up doing an African-American restaurant. The day before we opened, they break the windows. So there's a lot of different things. It didn't just, now our company, different people would be come up from incarceration. My husband taught most of the people how to do the construction outside work. So we were a problem because here it is, that was designed for the young men not to be able to, you know how you do, can't get a job because you got a record. Well, we believe you still got to live. Because if not, I don't need you breaking in my house. So let's give you some education. Let's teach you how to work. Teach you how this works. Now you can at least go out and do that work for your neighbor. That became a problem. So it's like I said, so this didn't just start. You have people out here that does and care about the community, that sees where there are issues, but you have other people who have a problem with you trying to educate your people. So you become a target. And we've been a target. I've been a target for over 20 some odd years.
I wanted to ask you, because I know you're doing preservation work. You have a museum. You're trying to find a way to preserve, because one of the issues, of course, is that gentrification is displacing black people and black culture and black institutions.
Exactly.
So would you just say a word about what you're attempting to do in terms of preservation work?
Okay. Well, we do have a museum. It's housed in one of the oldest houses in this town. And it was based on there was a board member. It was his birthplace, and he was one of our board members. So now they're attempting, they want to tear down the building. They said that, you know, what's going to happen, they're going to do eminent domain on the road, saying that they can't, it's not, so it would go right up against the museum to tear down the buildings. They're removing headstones from graveyards. It's just a whole lot of stuff that's being done, but because it's being done under the door, nobody. But our people see it now. Everybody sees it.
Right.
But we need, you know, whatever suggestions help, whatever you could give. This is what we're looking for.
And I think it's important to point out this is a small town, but you talk about moving the graveyards and stepping on the graveyards. Preserving our sacred sites is a part of the whole heart and soul as who we are as a people. So thank you so much for your sharing. We have a contingent from South Carolina. Representative Pendarvis, I don't think is in the room, but I got to put you on the spot, Representative King, in his absence, because I know you came here because you wanted to hear and what other people are doing. There's some issues in South Carolina. And so would you just briefly talk about what gentrification looks like and wherever you are in Charleston as you're dealing with it from the perspective of a state representative from South Carolina? Hold on, we need to get you a microphone that we want to hear you. Try it now and see whether it's on now.
Thank you. Representative King from South Carolina. And I was just jotting down some things, and just in reference to gentrification, if you are very familiar with Charleston, South Carolina, that has been our struggle there, and that community has been the moving of African-American people out of the inner city of Charleston. And just recently, in our historically black colleges and universities in South Carolina, there's an assault on trying to close those institutions down. And how they are doing it is removing programs from these state-supported schools and giving them to the majority schools, which essentially closes our schools. And we have just recently changed one institution, one HBCU in South Carolina, from a technical school to now a trade school, which essentially closes that school in that community. And what has happened is, what we are seeing is that they are coming in, building in our cities, but then moving our people out through the loss of their property, through not being able to afford the taxes, or family members that are in our community. We don't have people who leave their property when they pass to one individual, is to families, and they're then having to sell those properties. So we're seeing that in South Carolina. As you know, South Carolina was the entryway for many of our folk to come through, and they stayed there. But I wanted to ask a question, because this is something that is happening in South Carolina. I hosted an event in my district where I was trying to get more African-American people involved in getting state funds for building roads, buildings, or what have you. And we just recently had the Panthers that are now going to cross over from Charlotte over into South Carolina, where they would do all of their operation. My first question was, how do you, and this is what I said from the floor to my colleagues, how are we going to ensure that African-American people are going to be involved in this some $100 million tax break that we are giving to the Panthers? They could not answer that question, but they say minorities are there. I hosted an event in my district, and what I'm finding is that when we say minorities, I had an event, and when I had it, I said I wanted minorities to come. There was not one black person in the event. It was all white women. And so how do we define and stand within the law minorities? And what I found that I have to do is do it by numbers, percentage-wise, to say you have to meet a certain percentage, and it captures African-American businesses. But how do we do that across the country?
You know, usually
We'll get an answer to that. I want to get this, you know, because there is a question and answer period, but it's going to take a minute before we get to that. I want to make sure that we have sort of laid the narrative out. Salim Adolfo, I happened to be at a meeting in Washington, D.C., where you were reporting as a new ANC commissioner, trying to develop your community, that there was I think it's on $100 million project getting ready to be dropped down in your community. Community doesn't know about it. I mean, so tell us about that and what effect it's having in your district as an ANC commissioner.
Well, actually, thank you for the opportunity. It's a $750 million project over 2.4 million square feet. It's called Columbian Quarters. There's another one that is taking place several blocks away, right in Pastor Willie Wilson's neighborhood. It's called Reunion Square. And where I'm at, Homeland Security has just established its presence directly in my commission. And where we are challenged at is making sure that the residents from the community can be hired first, is making sure that the contracts for architecture, for design, many of those things can go to some of the engineers from our community, right? And what we're finding is that many of the people who are hired, who are getting the contracts, come from outside our community, and that the jobs that we have are the laborers. We're moving rocks from one end of the compound to the next. And so just even from that, the workforce development standpoint, we're at the bottom end of the totem pole. So we have to make sure that we can get sisters and brothers on those sites and in some of those spaces where they can get the jobs that actually pay money and where it can get the jobs that we can award some of the subcontracts. The other thing is that, just like my CEO said, in terms of the community benefits agreement, we're saying that the same old people time and time again are the only ones receiving the benefits of some of those community benefits agreements. So combining the element of activism and politics is making sure that we can get that information out to the community to say, hey, these are community benefits agreements that are available for all of the organizations to partake in, but it's not just about the money in the community benefits agreements, it's making sure scholarships can go to the schools. When they're building these different buildings, the retail space can go to some of the small businesses in the community. And then there's Brother Ari, who's doing a lot of work in terms of there's map amendments, and then there's the PUDs that are going on in our community, and some of the stuff our community just isn't aware of. And it's how do we get that information out to the community in time so that they can make informed decisions. Because coming to the table to have a discussion after the contract's already been signed and saying what we told the community is far too late. Many of these deals are taking place 15, 10 years, sometimes 20 years in advance. And like in DC, they have a comprehensive plan. They're discussing the plans for the city 20 years down the road. So for me to come in now, it's almost too late to some extent for a decision that was made and property sold a decade ago. And they're giving tax breaks to all of these different businesses, and then we're looking at it like, where do we fit in that? And if we don't get our system brothers in the, not just in the room, but at the table to make informed decisions, we're lost.
Well, I also just want to commend you for, because we followed your work and with the National Black United Front as an activist and an organizer. Now you're on the inside and perhaps have greater inspiration. So I just want to commend you for getting inside and, getting the complexity of it and, and working on those issues. We're now very happy that we have 3 representatives of 3 cities that are here, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Jackson, Mississippi, who have been kind enough, their mayors have been kind enough to send from Jackson, Mississippi, Sophia Omari is the chief of staff for Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba. Ellen Lee is representing the mayor of New Orleans, and Bill Hawthorne has taken time out of his schedule to be here from Atlanta. So Bill Hawthorne, and I want to start with you and to this issue of displacement or development without displacement. How is Atlanta approaching, we have to get a microphone. How is Atlanta approaching that question?
Dr. Daniels, thank you for that question. And let me first start by saying what a pleasure it is for me to be here on behalf of Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. It was you and my friend and mentor, Mark Mariel, who reached out to her office to encourage us to be here today. Unfortunately, she had an unresolvable conflict, as did our chief housing officer. So I was asked to appear here in their stead because this whole issue of gentrification, as we've heard yesterday and as we've heard this morning, has reached a crisis point in our communities. And she does view the whole topic of gentrification as an emergency situation. So although she couldn't be here, though our chief housing officer couldn't be here, they asked me to come in their stead to listen and learn and to understand what some other cities are doing to make progress in this area. Let me talk a little bit about her philosophy in general. And I heard yesterday, and I thought, Dr. Daniels, it was just a brilliant way to set this whole meeting up when you had a panel of activists followed by a panel of clergy to share their perspectives on this whole topic of gentrification. And I'm going to pick up a comment that Mark Mariel just talked about, and that is really the need for all of us to make sure that we are aligning our efforts and collaborating. And it is a multi-leg stool that we really have to have in order to make a big impact on this subject. And what I would suggest is that we take Mark's advice with the clergy, with the activists in the room, and talk about the common goal that we have, which is to welcome gentrification at the same time to avoid displacement, because we know those folks who get displaced are those people who are black and brown who are economically vulnerable. So I'm going to start there and throw that out as a challenge. But I want you to understand that we, unlike maybe other elected officials who were the subject of some criticism yesterday, we the City of Atlanta, led by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, we want to pursue administration where when she leaves office, we enjoy the type of legacy that a Maynard Jackson enjoys, that a Mark Mariel enjoys. She talks a lot about she doesn't want to be a good mayor. We've had several good mayors, but she wants to be a great mayor. It's interesting that yesterday, along with this sister here from New Orleans, we were in an economic mobility meeting in Charlotte where we were kicking around best practices on how do you really drive the economic conversation in our cities where we live. And over again, Maynard Jackson's name came up. I was in another meeting just the day before that with our Chamber of Commerce in the City of Atlanta, and it was kind of the who's who of business and philanthropy, and our mayor was also a panelist, and Maynard Jackson's name came up as a leader, as a giant, legendary figure whose legacy clearly has outlived his place, his human place in this world. So that's really what she's striving to. So I want to say that when she ran for mayor, she talked about this whole vision of one Atlanta, and that's one Atlanta where everybody who lives there, irrespective of race, religion, sexual orientation, zip code, could enjoy the opportunity for access to success in our city. And there are a number of topics, too many to talk about in the length of time I have here, Dr. Daniels, but there's criminal justice reform, it's HIV/AIDS, it's education, it's what's happening to our black males. I don't know if you saw the story that was in the paper a couple of days ago. Where are the black males? And that population of individuals is diminishing year over year. And there's some real stats there. I'm seeing it personally in my family situation with two daughters who don't have anybody to date, so they're dating outside their race for that reason. And she's a Howard graduate, and so she had exposure. I'm a Morehouse graduate, so she had that exposure, but there just is a small pool of black males, really, to talk about there for mates. So it could be that subject, but we're here to talk about affordable housing. And we in Atlanta enjoy the enviable position of being a city that is desirable to lots of people, including lots of people from the Northeast, Newark. In particular, my barber's from Newark, and he loves Newark, but he's now made his home in Atlanta, and we get a big population of migrants down from New York City as well. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to position ourselves to be an attractive place for U.S. citizens and also for international citizens, some immigrants. We actually have an office in Atlanta called Welcoming Atlanta that's set up specifically to welcome immigrants and to help educate them on how to integrate themselves into the great city of Atlanta. So what the mayor has done and what she learned a lot through a number of community meetings to be able to balance this, these competing considerations is she's working very closely with the business community. We have an arm called Invest Atlanta. Their job is to attract new business, new economic opportunity to the city. We were on a short list of Amazon's headquarters on the East Coast. As you may know, that was one of their projects, for example. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that while we're bringing new businesses in, these higher paying wage workers in, that she's also protecting our legacy residents. I mean, that's the tension. And so in order to do that, she has put a stake in the ground about the need to make sure that during her tenure, in order for her to be a great mayor, that she is creating affordable housing. So she, to that end, appointed the first ever chief housing officer in the city of Atlanta. Her name is Terry Lee, and she is somebody who is nationally known as a real expert in this area. And she was just appointed in January, so we don't have a great reveal to make today. We are a work in progress, and she's in the process now of finalizing her strategy, which she hopes to have by mid-year. But I think it starts with a vision that she did create and that the mayor has blessed, which is we want to aspire to provide pathways to affordable and equitable housing opportunities for all who desire to call Atlanta home, and that's going to be the centerpiece of her strategy.
Thank you very much. We want to go now to the gumbo city. I told him I was working with Miss Lee, and we were going back and forth, and I said, I'm not getting my visa to New Orleans canceled, so we're going to treat you real well. This challenge that we face in terms of development without displacement, what's the posture of New Orleans in that regard?
Well, first of all, thank you, and I just have to say it is so hard to sit here with Mayor Morial to talk about New Orleans, because he is so on his game and knows what's going on. I got to be on mine, but I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here. I'll just give a little bit of the background of New Orleans and what's going on and what have been some of the drivers of gentrification in New Orleans. And we can talk about solutions in another, we'll do that later. So just going way back, New Orleans was established in 1718. We just celebrated our 300th anniversary on last year. By 1850, New Orleans by far held the largest population of free people of color in the South. So we were in a community that had that whole mix of all kinds of people who were in that gumbo of what we call New Orleans. Like most cities, we had our peak population at the 1960 census. We were at 627,000 people in 1960. By the time of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, we were at about 450,000 in population. So significant population loss, not unlike many of many urban centers with white flight and the building of the interstates that facilitated suburban development. We're now at about 400,000, so not quite back to that population. Former Mayor Morial mentioned that 100,000 people of color, black people who lived in New Orleans pre-Katrina have not returned, have not been able, some chose not to return, some have not been able to return. Our population at the time of Katrina was 68% African American and 30% Caucasian. We're now 59% African American, 34% Caucasian, and we've seen the largest growth in the Latino population. So a little diversity of food, I'm good with that too in town. We have 32% of black people in New Orleans living below the poverty level. 59% of black residents are renters. We've got 50% of all of our renters who are paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs, their housing cost burden. And for those of us who think home ownership is the key to wealth and asset building, it's one of the things, but we still have 30% of all of our homeowners who are paying more than 30% of their costs, of their incomes on housing. 44% of all of our businesses are minority owned, but they only receive 2% of all of the business receipts that are generated in the city. So huge disparities. I'm saying that to say that, it is definitely about housing. We can't build our way out of this crisis. We'll talk about housing and gentrification, but we're not going to be able to just build our way. There's not enough money, there's not enough resources to build the housing. We have to take a multi-pronged approach around. It's also about income. It's also about transportation. It's also about business growth and development. That being said, some of the things that really ramped up our current state were our post-Katrina. 2005, we had this little thing called Hurricane Katrina. We saw, after that, billions of dollars that came into our city for rebuilding. So whether that was disaster, community development block grants, money from FEMA, and other kinds of resource, philanthropy money, billions of dollars coming into our city post-Katrina. We talked about where were those dollars being invested. We saw a lot of investment happening in downtowns. Downtown New Orleans had been empty and I'm a lifelong New Orleanian. For most of my life, nobody lived downtown. Now downtown is bustling, it is full. So we saw a lot of investments there. So those incentives, tax incentives, other kinds of investments in downtowns to build up downtowns, because downtowns are cool now, right? They're the cool places to live in cities, and cities are cool now. All those baby boomers who moved out to the suburbs to get their kids better education in the suburbs, they're now coming back in town. Those kids who grew up in the suburbs don't want to live in the suburbs, they want to live in cities. So cities are cool. There's a lot of market pressure there on housing. We have seen in some parts of New Orleans the change in workforce and the nature of work. And so if I can work from home and I don't have to live where I work, why wouldn't I want to live in New Orleans? I would. I do. So when you have choices about where you can work, you can live and not have to live in the place where you work. So we have a lot of new people who have come to New Orleans in tech jobs and other jobs that don't require them necessarily to have to live in the place of their job. So we've seen that. Short-term rentals. Again, you want to come down for Mardi Gras or Jazz Fest or Festival Season or Essence Festival or whatever that is, we can find a short-term rental for you, and that's put pressure on displacing some other affordable rental units. I have seen a lot of doubles. You know, we're a city of doubles. A lot of our housing stock is doubles. A lot of doubles converted to singles. So people want, you know, they want a bigger home. They don't want to have to walk through, you know, your bedroom to get to the kitchen. So the reconfiguration of housing to meet the demands of what consumers want has contributed to some of that. That's anytime you convert a double, you're taking out, you know, typically a rental unit. And then some of our blight reduction strategies that have demolished housing in our efforts to remove blight in New Orleans have also taken out some of the housing stock that was available for development. So just saying that these are some of the factors that have contributed to our challenges. And, you know, it is for us, it deeply impacts our hospitality sector, those workers who are working in those industries. When you're not earning living wages, and you can't live close to where you work, this is a problem for us. So, you know, our workers who support our hospitality sector are being driven out further and further out. We have to focus on transportation. We have to focus on all the other systems that support them. And I just want to say those are some of the drivers. We can talk about solutions and what we're doing about it.
All right, thank you very much. Yesterday, there were many, many references to a certain city in Mississippi that was being held up as the oasis of all the solutions. Now, I don't mean that seriously, but Jackson is being looked at, and it was being referred to, particularly by activists yesterday. And let me just say also, we appreciate the representatives of elected officials and so forth, because it was, Mayor Baraka asked me a minute ago, how was it yesterday? I said, it was somewhat heated yesterday. Because there was a lot of critique, you know, of what people see, and of course, President Morial said that was a good thing. This dialectical tension can be constructive, actually. But certainly, many people point to Jackson, Mississippi, and we're really delighted in terms of the busy schedule you have doing the work in Jackson, Mississippi, to be here. So please, Sister Sophia Omari.
Good morning. I just want to begin by saying that Jackson is a wonderful place, a beautiful place to live and raise families. But I want to make this disclaimer. We don't have all the solutions. We are a new administration. We've been there, it will be 2 years in July. And I think probably the most outstanding thing about the administration is the fact that we are committed to serving the people of Jackson. Our ideology of our citizens' needs are first. The idea of economic development is not just one where we want to bring in businesses, but we want to create what we call a dignity economy, an economy that is not based on the exploitation of workers and our citizens, but an economy that speaks to the needs of every resident of Jackson. So our strategic plan was built around this idea of building a dignity economy. And there are 5 components to it, and I don't have my handout here, but affordable housing is one component of that. And in affordable housing, we understand that our people need safe communities with educational systems that produce citizens who understand who we are as a people, what Jackson means to Mississippi and the South overall, and how government should be a tool of self-determination. Right. Now, someone mentioned self-determination yesterday in all of the discussion that was taking place. And for us, self-determination means simply having control of your life, having control of the resources that are necessary for you to live your life as a human being with everything that any human being on this planet deserves, right? So Jackson, having been a hub of the civil rights movement, a place where tremendous historical events took place, we value civil rights, but we also govern from a human rights perspective. So part of our job has been educating our constituency about what they deserve as citizens of Jackson, what they deserve from us, and what they deserve from any administration that should succeed us. So the idea that your tax dollars, whether you're poor and our median income is in somewhere in the vicinity of $30,000, our median income, we have a majority of poor people, 170,000 plus population, a $2.5 billion infrastructure problem that we have an annual budget of $350 million to deal with. So you can understand that the average citizen in Jackson is suffering. They're suffering from potholes, and I mean, we have some monster potholes, y'all. I mean,
Come on down.
Our citizens, like during the Christmas season, somebody put a Christmas tree in a pothole, you know, and then put it on Facebook as a meme, right? And so we have these serious
Same problems.
infrastructure problems, right? We have sanitary sewer overflows. We're under a federal consent decree that we can't pay, right? A prior administration signed on to what they thought was a $450 million consent decree that's now an $800 million process. And as I said, we have a $350 million annual budget. So our citizens, our city is really struggling. We have all of the problems and issues of larger cities with fewer resources, I'll say, even though I know larger cities have resource problems either. So affordable housing and gentrification is a concern. But Jackson is usually a couple of decades behind the rest of the country, right? So we've had the white flight to suburban areas, but one thing I really want to point out that our flight has not just been white flight, it has been middle class black flight. Right? So those incomes that are substantial due to the fact that we have 7 universities within the city, 2 of which are HBCUs, and they typically pay higher than most salaries in a city of Jackson's size. We've lost that tax base as well. So we have communities that are decimated with blight, homes that, well-built homes, homes built by Black men with skills in carpentry and plumbing and all of that. And when those homes were abandoned, we had contractors that would come in and take out all that old good wood, right, to use in remodeling other folks' homes. So we have a tremendous blight problem. Our problem has been, how do we serve our citizens best with the huge problems that we face? So one of the things we felt we had to address was the fact that we had a failing school system that the state came in to take over. So we felt like we had to put energy and resources toward fighting a state takeover of our school system. And let me just say, we were successful. Even though everyone told us that it didn't make any sense to take on our Republican governor about saving the school district, let him have it, and move on from there. We decided that the education, if Jackson is ever going to reach its full potential, it has to have educated citizens who love Jackson and who support the city in its efforts, right? So we fought for our school district and we won it, right? Our governor did not sign the takeover. And we are in the process of actually collaborating with our citizens to design a school system where our children can be educated. We understand that when children come from poverty or from traumatic circumstances, and oppression is traumatic, and it is systematic, and we understand that. So we recognize that we have to have solutions that take all of that into account, and that you can't build something first and then ask people to support it. You have to involve them in the building.
That's right.
So that's our approach to government in Jackson. We are community activists for the most part. The administration comes from both the academy, where we know ideas abound, but application can be problematic, right? Right. So we have some, I myself am from the academy, but I also have a very long history in the New African Independence Movement. So I understand what community is about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I understand the importance of activism to keep government accountable, because government is very complicated, a lot more complicated than I thought it was from the outside, right? On the inside, you really realize what we're up against, right? When we say we're in the belly of the beast, government is a beast. And so it takes, it's gonna take our best, our brightest, and our most committed to our people.
Yes.
And I could go on and on. We really aren't faced with gentrification right now, with the exception of we're seeing the revitalization of our downtown. We have 0%, 100% occupancy rate in our downtown Jackson, and we expect that it's coming, right? We understand that there have been corporations buying up land in our blighted communities in huge amounts at one time in our tax sales. And so we are trying to prepare to prevent the onslaught of displacement. Our mayor has stated publicly that we will not move our people from one state of misery to another for somebody else's profit. We will not do it for anybody's profit. I am here because he would have been here. He's in Iceland. He couldn't get here. But he wanted me to be here in this convening so that we can get some possible solutions to begin working on for when it does come into play. But I also want to say, in the words of our mayor's father, one of the statements, I don't know how familiar you are with him being elected, but it was thought that nobody as radical and as militant and outspoken as Chokwe, the senior Chokwe Lumumba, could ever get elected to anything, anywhere in Mississippi. Not only did he scare white folk, he scared the hell out of black folk too, you know, because they, you know, we benefit from these systems once we get to a certain level, right? We all benefit, and they knew he was going to stop all of that for everybody. Well, but one of the statements that won the hearts and minds of the citizens of Jackson when he was running, he made the statement, if you don't love the people, you'll eventually betray the people. And that statement, and we had a lot of discussion about how our politicians typically betray the people who elect them yesterday. I think that statement and organizing an administration around that statement. If you're going to work in this administration, you got to love the people, and you got to evaluate solutions with the people first, right?
Okay.
How will this affect constituents? You know, what does this mean to have to annually raise our water rates when people can't pay their water bills right now, all right? So we have to govern with the love of the people first and foremost in our minds, with this caveat, right? As governors, we don't really have the power. We have to make sure that the power is maintained in the masses so that we are responding to them from the positions where we are.
Okay.
And that's why Jackson is such an amazing place, and why we feel that what we're trying to do in Jackson is not, it's going to spread out. There are 18 counties in Mississippi in poverty, from Jackson as you go west to the Mississippi River, and as you go north up into the Mississippi Delta. All of those counties are impoverished, and they are black majority with black governing officials, and we have to make sure that they look at our example and understand that being black in Mississippi doesn't mean you have to be poor and incompetent, but it means that you have to use the resources that we have to build institutions and governments that work in the interests of our people. And I'll end with that.
All right, okay. That's hard. It's hard to interrupt that. But there's a method to my madness. I mean, I'm coming to Assemblyman Charles Barron, primarily because equally Assemblyman Charles Barron and his wife, Councilwoman Barron, Inez Barron, and in power, are gaining a reputation around the country. People are now beginning to look at the Republic of New East New York as a model of how, at this current stage, gentrification can be challenged. And so we really were delighted that the budget got covered quickly, so you could be here at this table, so you could talk to us, not so much about what the issues are and the problems is, but how you have, from the very beginning, addressed the issue of how to make sure that the people benefit from the from your being in power, your wife being in power, and the work that you've been doing. Assemblyman, y'all flipped. Assemblyman
mess up my domestic
Charles
tranquility,
Barron.
man. Holy council. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniels, and to Mayor Ross Baraka. Thank you for hosting this. It's a critical piece. I just want to have full disclosure. I'm a revolutionary nationalist. I believe in socialism. I believe the problem is that we are this is a symptom of a deeply rooted, systemic, racist, parasitic, predatory capitalist system, and we can't replace it with compassionate capitalism or black capitalism. Neither one of those can replace what we're doing. So at some point, we got to have a conference on ideology, because when you have a movement without ideology and vision, it's like flying a plane without radar. You don't know where to land or really where you're going, you're just moving. So having said that, bringing it to New York State and New York City is incredible. We're talking about New York State. I just finished the budget there and voted against all of the appropriation bills, and I had good reason to. But we have a $175 billion budget in New York State and a $92 billion budget in New York City. So when you look at 175 and 92 billion, you're talking about 260, 70 billion dollars in one state. I don't want to hear nothing about Donald Trump. We need to talk about Andrew Cuomo, the governor, and Mayor de Blasio, because with $270 billion, we shouldn't have the kind of poverty that we have in black and brown communities. So what we focused on is the city council and the state assembly. New York City has 8 million people, 8 million. 55% of them are black and Latino, and 10% are Asian. 65% of New York City is people of color. The city council has 51 members. Half of them, 26, more than half, is black, Latino, and Asian. Right. Whites are minorities in the city council and minorities in the city population, but have a majority of real power. That's what we're fighting. In the state, we have 150 state assembly members, and I'm one of 45 in the state assembly, and there's another 13, 14 in the state senate. Right now, we have a black who's heading the state senate, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, senator, a black, Carl Hastie, assembly member, who's heading the state assembly, a black who's the attorney general, Letitia James, made history. She became the first black attorney general in the state of New York and the first black Attorney General of the state of New York who wouldn't indict a police officer who murdered an innocent civilian. So we got all of this black, and when black people get in power, we want to put black faces in high places, but then we have these folk in places and we stop demonstrating, we stop doing things because they're black. And we don't want to go against black people, so we got to get the right black people in the right places with the right ideology. Let me take my little beloved East New York. I love East New York. If they mess with East New York, I'm going to rumble. You know, we have similar demographics of Jackson, and by the way, we followed the Jackson model. There's a lot of good things that was done there, but we have similar demographics. We have 162,000 people in East New York. An overwhelming number, 70% black, 20% Latino, and we have 10% other, and even the other is not all white. There's Bangladesh and some others. So I could talk my talk. I don't have to be careful because we have a black majority, and my biggest challenge in East New York is not white people. It is the black Democratic Party clubs that control all the politics and resources because as Dr. King said, these are manufactured leaders that the white power structure gives prestige and resources to, so it's difficult for you to beat them because they have resources. Well, we beat them. We wiped out the Democratic Party club, and just to be honest, true confession, I am not a true Democrat. I am using them because you don't win a seat in East New York when 95% of the people are registered Democrats. I can come in there and talk about some, power party all I want. They are going in November and they see Democrat, they are voting down the line. So we using the Democratic primary as a strategy, as a tactic by registering. I don't go to their meetings. They don't do no fundraising for me. We get on the ballot ourselves. We have no part of the Democratic Party because when you look at the Republicans and the Democrats, they are so closer together now, although there's still difference. When I got on the floor before I came here, I told the gathered assembly members, we are no longer going to call this a two-party dominated capitalist system. It's one party, and you can call yourself either Democrats or Republicrats because it's one party. They're getting so close together. In East New York, the way we stop gentrification, the Daily News doesn't like me at all, but they had to write a nice article saying that East New York experienced the highest increase in black population than any other place in the state. 13.2% increase in the black population. There was, and I didn't chase them out, there was a 6% decrease in the white population. I'm totally innocent. They left on their own volition. They left on their own volition. But the way that happened is through the area median income, the AMI. The AMI. If you have black politicians, like some that are in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is right next to us, and some that are in Canarsie, it's the black politicians. You heard Mark Mariel mention the inclusionary zoning. We rejected that in East New York because the inclusionary zoning basically says that if you want government subsidies, if you want to get the land cheap to the white developers for $1 or $500, whatever, you have to have 20%, 30% affordability. We in East New York, with my wife and I, by the way, y'all make sure y'all tell her that I mentioned her and tell her I love her. Inez Barron, she's the council member. Y'all make sure I need all the brownie points I can get. You tell her I said something nice about her in front of you. We decided, because it's about power, it's power. The city council member has the power to determine what's built on city-owned land. So if the city council member locally says, I don't want that project, the subcommittee of land use is going to say, Barron said no, reject it. That's what they do. Automatically, that can't be built. So these developers know that. So when they come into our district with my wife and I, we sit with them and they pull out all the beautiful pictures and say, look at the wonderful, affordable stuff we're going to have. Put the pictures away. What's the AMI? The area median income. The area median income of East New York is over 60% of us make $35,000 or less. Then there's another 20% of us that make $45,000 to $50,000, and then there's another 10, 15% that make $60,000 to $80,000. The problem I had was with middle-class blacks making $60,000 to $80,000. They said, Charles, we love you, but some of us make more than $40,000. You can't let just the $40,000 come in. 'Cause that's what I did. I made these developers say, I'm not signing off on anything unless it meets the income band of my neighborhood. Not what HUD says, 80% of the AMI. HUD said affordability is 80% of the AMI. 80% of the AMI in New York City is $64,000 because New York City's AMI is 75,000. So we said, no, we are defining affordability, not you or HUD. And we're not signing off on it. So could Linwood pass this around real quick? I'll be finished in 2 minutes. Could he pass this?
Oh, yeah,
thing?
fine, yeah.
Linwood, you could pass it around. This is incredible. This is a sample. There's been over 10,000 units of housing we brought into East New York. And I'm telling you, as I sit before you, you can look on the records, not one apartment is market. Not one market apartment, not one. Not 5%, 10%, 0% market. This is why the black population increased. And then if you're making too much money, if you're making $100,000, you can't move into nothing in East New York because everything is according to the income of our neighborhood. Now, I don't understand the oxymoron of gentrification without displacement. I don't understand that. Gentrification is displacement. It is displacement. And don't let them tell you that you got to gentrify so you can have a diversity of incomes. Nonsense. That you have to gentrify so that you can get more economic development and more government sources. Let me tell you, we stopped gentrification. We have 3 new schools for over $100 million. We have 4 parks renovated, over $25 million. We have 2 new youth centers, $10 million apiece. We have 3,000 jobs for our youth came in. We kicked out Walmart. They tried to come in. They said, you need Walmart in. We stopped Walmart from coming in. Why? Because the developer Related had the power to bring Walmart in, but we had the power to bring Related in. And we said, Related, if you bring in Walmart, you will not get the contract. And let me tell you one last thing about minority and woman business. We don't even say that. When they sit at my table, we say we want black contractors, period. I don't even know what minority means anymore. We want black contractors. So in this last one, about a month ago, there's 22 acres of land in East New York. We sat down with the governor's people, and they said that they wanted to bring in a contractor, and they said, guess what, Assemblyman Barron, we're going to have 45% MWBEs. I said, I'm not interested in that. You know what I'm interested in? 22 acres? 22? I want a black contractor to own a third of that. And he'll bring his own, she'll bring his own subcontractors in. So that's what we got. We own, we are the general contractor, not a subcontractor. We have a general contractor, and then you got to tell them black folk, you didn't get that because you were smart. You didn't get that because you had skills. You got that because a radical, a black, still to my heart, Black Panther radical got elected and told the white power structure, if he didn't bring your capitalist aspiring self in, we weren't signing off on it. So I sat them brothers and sisters down. So when y'all get out there, y'all got to contribute to the movement, because you didn't get here because you were smart or had any degrees. You got in here because we demanded it. It's the same thing with Howard Dotson, who did the Schomburg. He didn't get there because he was in Atlanta in the Institute of the Black World. He got to the Schomburg because we went down to the library head and said, get the other Negro sellout that y'all want in out of here. We want Howard Dotson, and he wound up not being all that either. But anyway, we got him in. So I just want to end with this. This is about power. And we don't have to have activism versus elected officials of politics. We need revolutionaries, radicals like Chokwe, Lumumba to get into the electoral arena. Stop saying that's the man system, that I'm not a part of this capitalism. There's no inside-outside strategy. We all inside capitalism. Whether you are in the electoral arena or outside of it demonstrating, you are a victim of capitalism because you're paying your taxes, the same ones that don't want to be bothered with the electoral football arena, they have bank accounts, they're working somewhere, and they're paying taxes to capitalism. So since that's the reality, let's get inside and rock it. Let's shake it up, stand strong, be black and strong, be radical, revolutionary, and don't let anybody say that you have to learn how to play the game. Change it.
All right. I told you there's a method to my madness, okay? Now we need people to be patient. This session is two sides. We haven't gotten to this side yet, so take a deep breath. Be patient as we work through this conversation. And of course, then we want to invite the mayor to, he's taking notes and make his own observations. We have two other people I want to share briefly, and I have a question for them. Demarius Love, who is and we appreciate you coming, as the Chief Operating Officer, Vice President for External Affairs for the Association of African American Mayors. And you've been listening, I'm sure, attentively, and I just want to pose the question as you listen. How do you see African American mayors sort of relating to what you've heard in the last 24 hours in terms of this issue? I know as I talk with you, there are some issues and ideas that you're working on, but I'm wondering, to the degree that you've listened to this conversation, how will it shape your perspective as you report back to the Association of African American Mayors?
This, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing us to be here. It's a lot to process, and going back, just kind of sharing some of the work that we've done, addressing gentrification. It is an issue. It is a big issue, and we have multiple big cities now being led by African American people, with Chicago becoming the latest, electing a black woman as the mayor of the city. And so just kind of from our viewpoint, some things that we've done, we've signed on to a coalition for mayors and CEOs for U.S. affordable housing, and that is holding companies accountable and also taking in, taking public-private partnerships. It's the biggest thing that we've been doing. Mayor Bilaus of Charlotte, North Carolina, has been big on this, and in fact, I think it was yesterday or the day before, with BB&T Bank and SunTrust signing in for a $30 million investment into affordable housing. We have to, the language on the national scale, on the national level, is a little different. It's gentrification is happening. How do we make it affordable to keep our people within the community? And so that's one thing that we're looking at and kind of where we are. So kind of taking that back and reporting, I see African American mayors playing a huge portion and a huge role in this. We have right now, the 4 biggest municipal leagues are headed by African American individuals. You have the African American Mayors Association, who our current president is Mayor Oliver Gilbert III out of Miami Gardens, Florida. You have the National League of Cities, who has a black woman as the president, who is the mayor of Gary, Indiana, Karen Freeman Wilson. Then you also have the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who is headed by Mayor Steve Benjamin of Columbia, South Carolina, a black man. And then you also have the National Black Council of Elected Officials in NBSC Leo, who is headed by, as their president is Councilman Stamps out of Jackson, Mississippi. So you have black people at the forefront of these conversations, leading these organizations now to bring this to the table and to bring this to the agenda. And so I do see a large change coming. It is hard fighting the system. There is a system in place. There is a system in place, and we recognize that. And so finding the proper channels and the proper avenues to make the changes is one thing that we're figuring out how to deal with.
Thank you very much. Now to our esteemed senior elder mayor, Johnny Ford. Now, Johnny, you still have to sit at the table. No, don't do that. Don't do that. I understand that, but don't do that, please. We're not granting, I'm sitting here, I said that yesterday for a reason. We're not. I'm giving you your props. All
All
right, so my question to you, because you're one of the founding members of the Association of African American Mayors, and then you're now the president of the World Conference of Mayors. And so in some ways, we're counting on you, because let me just say this, in my conversations with Mayor Baraka, one of the things that he and I talked about was, if we could somehow identify 10, 15 mayors who were on the same, and other elected officials for that matter, but given the municipal power piece that Mark Morial laid out, and he's on the same accord, then we could really, it could be a game changer. So you've been here yesterday, you hear where we are, so give us your sense of how you feel about the prospects of us moving forward an agenda where mayors will be at the center of creating this paradigm shift.
Well, we've heard about gentrification in terms of being a problem and a challenge, so I'll not dwell on that. And I'd really like to talk about some recommendations, because with a wife who's ill in Cambridge, and last night I heard from my daughter who's been missing for a number of days in Tuskegee. I don't know if I'll be with you much longer.
Oh, sorry.
But let me just say this to you and to Mayor Baraka. My heart is happy to see the two of you. You all may not realize the history that you're looking at. Because of you, Dr. Daniels and Mayor Baraka's father, that black convention in 1972 made it possible for me and others to become mayors of cities, because out of that Gary convention, you all made it happen. We didn't realize the history that was being made then. It is just as important what we are doing here today as what we did in 1972 in Gary. Black mayors, African American mayors, the faith community. It is now time for us to come together, the activists, all of us. We can't afford, it is now time for us to circle the wagons around this issue of gentrification. We must make it a national issue. Therefore, I speak on behalf of my president of the World Conference of Mayors, Mayor Ed Jones, the mayor of Grambling, Louisiana, who is the president of our organization, which represents mayors across the country, and 5,000 mayors in Africa now, because we are now united with the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa. The Secretary General Jean-Paul Mbasi has joined with us, and so together, because many mayors do not take this issue of displacement as a top priority, because gentrification, they've been so focused on getting investments in communities that they have not paid attention to the displacement. They have been focused on redeveloping our communities. They've been concerned about crime and job and health care and the other issues. But we must make it a top priority, and this emergency meeting can be that, Dr. Daniels. I'm not here by myself, as you know. I've got Mary Thomas, our international advisor. All of our people, raise your hand. We've got Scott Armstrong here. We got Tanya DeBose. And there were a number of others who wanted to be here that you had to say no because you were overloaded. But we understand that. So we are with you. Therefore, when the African American Mayors Association meets, Brother Love, this month in Houston, being hosted by the mayor, I'm going to recommend to them that they adopt a resolution there making gentrification a top priority of the African American Mayors Association, and calling upon those mayors because they are primarily mayors of big cities in the African American Mayors Association. When we organized the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors, we did it. We were small town mayors because we had to find a way to deal with George Wallace down in Alabama. So 8 black mayors got together and we organized that, and that grew into the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors, the Southern Conference of Black Mayors, and the National Conference of Black Mayors with Marion Barry in Washington, and now we have a World Conference. But the point I'm stressing is we've got to collaborate.
Yes.
So the African American Mayors Association. Number 2, October, during the Congressional Black Caucus, I will convene the National Policy Alliance. You came last year,
yes,
dealing with the Return to Africa movement. On that agenda, we will place gentrification as a top priority. Why? Because the National Policy Alliance represents the 9 national black public policy organizations, the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Black Caucus of state legislatures. I am a past legislator, the National and African American Mayors, so all of those organizations. That too, we must pass a resolution making it a top priority.
Okay.
Thirdly, October 6th through the 8th, in historic Tuskegee, Alabama, under the shadows of Booker T. Washington, there I will convene the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance, the voice of more than 1,000 historic black towns, most of them inspired by Booker T. Washington. Those organizations will come together in our first national meeting. Why? Because the black culture in our historic black towns and black settlements is being displaced.
Right.
We've got to preserve our history and our culture for our children and future generations. And so again, Dr. Daniels, we're going to invite you to be on the agenda, and we're going to make as a top priority gentrification on that agenda. And then lastly, in Orlando, you weren't able to be with us, but we're going to invite you again. We'll convene the World Conference of Mayors Board, and at that meeting, January the 29th through February 1st in Orlando, here again, we will put gentrification on the agenda and charge and challenge our mayors to take a front row position in this fight. Together, let us move forward together, and we can make gentrification a top priority in this nation. We've got to fight it.
Thank you very kindly. Appreciate that. Just a round of applause for Mayor Johnny Ford. Okay, now shifting to our civil rights leaders side, if we can. I guess Hillary Shelton will be coming back. But I wanted to go first to Vivian Cox Frazier, just to say a word about the work of the Urban League in New York, Newark and Essex County, you know, in terms of the programmatic work that you're doing that's complementary to and trying to deal with this monster that we call gentrification.
Thank you. First, I'd like to recognize my mayor, the Honorable Raj J. Baraka, who certainly is aligned with all the work that we're doing, and we could not do the work that we do without the support of the city and his support and his leadership. So I've been at the League about 15 years now, and I'd say in the last 7 years we've been working to transform the Urban League from a traditional social service organization into more of a community development, economic development entity. So it's the integration of the services as well as the economic development work that we're doing that we feel is important in the area of standing in the gap, I would say, for our people. One thing I want to say is that the mayor has an initiative of Hire, Buy, Live here in Newark, and the League's work is really aligned with those 3 areas. We are training residents in construction, and we are training residents in construction. We're building new homes, And the residents we're training, we're also putting through our Financial Opportunity Center so that they can participate in our home ownership program to eventually buy. I am a child of Washington, D.C., so I know gentrification up close. And D.C. is a place in the country has the highest rate of displacement of black people.
Right.
And I see it in my own family. My family, my father was a roofer, my mother was a nursing assistant. They worked hard, they bought their home, and as someone mentioned, they left it to their children, my brother, my sister, and I. And the question is, now they want to sell. So, you know, you think about building wealth and ownership, and I see it in the neighborhood around the Urban League's offices as well. There's signs up around Newark, we buy houses cheap. My organizer goes out, we pull them down, because we really want people to understand that it's important that our community builds, and we build wealth. It's not only about, it's about individual, family, and community wealth. And that's our agenda, is how do we do that? How do we own our homes? How do we own the real estate? How do we own the businesses? And so all our work is coalesced around that idea. And the other thing I would say is that we're really highly interested, I'm very highly interested in the opportunity zones. There are 12 of them in this city. They're all around low-income communities, and we've spoken about it before. Don't sleep on it. That's what I'm going to say. So I'm developing a fund, a $25 million fund to buy real estate, to buy homes. So I would say that my New Year's resolution was, you know, bootstrapping ain't easy, and there's no glory in it. And that's what I feel like I've been doing for 15 years, bootstrapping, cobbling together money from here, cobbling money there from there. No, there's money out there, and our communities need it, and they need institutions to help go get it. So that's really what I'm about. The Economic Development Authority, I'm going to go get some money from there. The state, I'm going to get some money from there. And because our communities cannot build without capital. So, and you can't stop this. So I'm saying capitalism doesn't need any help. It's going to take good care of itself. It's our responsibility to take care of our communities, and we need capital to do it. So that's what I'm going to say. I'm not trying to, I mean, so if you're in a nonprofit organization, you're used to it. You're used to, you know, looking for this grant here, getting this grant there, and you spend so much time in that. And I'm saying, no, we need to have our eyes on the prize, and that's ownership. And that's capital, and don't be ashamed of it, right? Don't be ashamed of it, because we're going to use that capital for the benefit of our people. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. One of our partners who was here last year, Mayor Baraka, you may recall, is David Harris, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Race and Justice at Harvard University, where our beloved Charles Ogletree, we called him Tree, affectionately, was founded that and set a great tone. And so, David, you have been working on the issue of the Marshall Plan. And this Marshall Plan idea is infused into this work. In fact, Mayor Baraka, at the State of the Black World Conference, you stated your support for a Marshall Plan, and we talked about it last year. And by the way, we are working on that agenda. So, David, I wish you would just say a bit about how you see the Marshall Plan concept being interwoven into these discussions about how to blunt and overcome gentrification.
Well, thank you, Ron. You know, it's really a pleasure to be here. You know, it's a little bit awkward because we've heard a lot of criticism or observations about both political leaders and academics, and I do come from an academic institution. I want to be very careful and make it very clear that I'm with the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice, right? Now, you all need to know who Charles Hamilton Houston was and what that means for Tree and me in this organization. And there's something that Charles Hamilton Houston left us with that guides our work. There are a lot of things, but one of the things that Charles Hamilton Houston said is that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite. Right? Now that's our marching orders, right? So social engineering, I'm a sociologist, social engineering has a kind of funny connotation to it, so I don't really think of myself as a social engineer, but I think I'm on that end of the spectrum, and that's the work that we do. So, you know, we have this idea that we call the the Houston Marshall Plan for Community Justice, and it really is quite simple. And I'm loath to think about kind of advising activists. I mean, this room is full of people doing the work that we consider community justice. But quite simply, our idea is, I think it's important that the Urban League is calling for this, for its own plan. But I also think it's important for us to understand and recognize that every day, in every city throughout this country, there are individuals and organizations working to rebuild our cities in the face of the devastation that has been wrought by decades of war on crime and war on drugs fought on our streets in our communities against our people. And the point of our plan is that we might need $2 trillion, but we have unbelievable resources at work on the street in our communities today. And that we need to call them up and have them in a position such that if this money does come through, they can get it. But the fact of the matter is that the rebuilding is going on. So our plan is really quite simply to identify that work that's going on throughout the country, to make it. I was fascinated by Dr. Frazier's website, because our website is designed also to house information on what individuals and organizations are doing to mobilize across the country, make that information available to everybody. And one of the things that we're going to do that's an extension from last year is we're going to create an open portal, similar to what Dr. Frazier is doing, to allow people to register what they're doing, what works in their community, along eight basic topics. We have 8 topic areas: housing, education, economic stability, infrastructure, safety and healing. And it's important for me, I want to say here, we say safety and healing. We reject the term criminal justice and criminal justice reform. It conjures all these associations between criminality and race. We call that safety and healing. So when you go to our website, you won't see criminal justice, you'll see safety and healing. And it flows out of our understanding that justice itself means being made whole. That's our operative definition, and that's what we need to be doing in our communities. And I want to kind of call out the sister here who advised us on this question of the difference between empowerment and self-determination. You know, because one of the issues, empowerment really suggests and conjures a lack of power. So we don't need to use that term. We need to think about the language that we're using when we talk about what we're trying to do. Self-determination is a legitimate way of thinking about it. Maybe we think of something else. But so the other thing that we really care about has to do with the language we use and the work that we're doing. And I want to close by giving an example of the way we work. There are 2 of them. One of them is sitting here in the room right now, and I got to give a shout out to Melvin White from the Beloved Streets of America, because one of the things that's very important to us is, in fact, to identify who's doing this work and put them on a stage to kind of uplift the work that they're doing. And the other is, and I have to say, I think I spoke about her last year, is on January 31st, we lost a giant of organizing and work in our communities, a woman named Lily A. Estes from Richmond, Virginia. Now, maybe none of you have ever heard of her, but she started a thing in Richmond long ago called Reframe, Residents of Public Housing in Richmond Against Mass Eviction. Now, Lily thought of herself as a community strategist, is what she said. And she basically, she died at 59 years old on January 31st. But she gave her life to a form of organizing in which she would never, ever get out in front of her people, right? So she has some ideas about what needed to be done, but if people weren't with her or out in front of her, she wouldn't do it. So I'm going to close with this, because the challenge that I have, something has been called out here that's really important. The challenge that I have with our project is I sit at this place called Harvard University, right? I often try not to say it out loud. That's why I'll say I'm from Cambridge or something. But the fact of the matter is that Harvard University, Rutgers University, these universities are filled with resources. Yes, they are. Right? Harvard University has a School of Public Health, a Kennedy School of Government, a law school, a medical school, a business school, right? Have all of these resources, and it is my task and my challenge to find out how to get those resources devoted to the work that we want to do. Now, the problem with doing that is that Harvard also has this idea of leadership, right? So Harvard's idea of leadership is they train and create these students, they send them out into the world to do what? To take over, right? So their model of leadership is, I know, let me come out here and tell you what to do, right? So the battle I have, and we fight it constantly, is trying to work with those students who are anxious and thirsty to be doing this stuff to understand that there's an alternative form of leadership. It's a form of leadership that says you walk by, with, and behind others, right? And we are finding that, in point of fact, if we give those students who are kind of being generated by this Harvard machine the opportunity to rethink what leadership means, to rethink how to put what they're learning to the good of others, that we actually have a great deal of success. So again, I'm really humbled to be here among you all, and Ron, I thank you for inviting me.
All right, we're almost, let's give him a round of applause. We're almost to the point where the mayor can intercede. We have two more persons to, and these are all, this is with intentionality. You know, this is not at random. I just reconnected with this brother recently. I getting ancient and old, so he gave me a call and said, "This is Todd." I said, "Well, Todd, who is Todd?" "Well, we were the African Heritage Studies Association." He didn't tell me he was, I'm in my generation, Reverend Tony Lee and Reverend Wilson, I don't call y'all Willie and Lee. I mean, I'm just like that. I could never do that. So I said, but he is Reverend Sheridan Todd Yeary. And he's representing Reverend Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition. He is vice president of the organization. But in my conversation with him, he talked about opportunity zones. And Reverend Buster Soares, who could not be here yesterday because he eulogized Kenneth Gibson last evening, in my conversation with him, he said, "Ron," he said, "gentrification can be a blessing, or it will be, opportunity zones can be a blessing, or they will be gentrification on steroids." That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And so I turned to you, because in my conversation with you, you came with ideas and even with an approach. So again, you said, "What do you want to do?" I said, I'm ready. Talk to us. And you heard the discussion here. How can we deal with turning this opportunity zones from a curse to a blessing?
Thank you, Dr. Ron Daniels, and to all of you in the room. Good afternoon on behalf of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr., who is our esteemed leader and soldier at almost 78 years old, having publicly disclosed an ailment, has not slowed down at all. He is actually flying in from Memphis this morning on the way to New York, back to Chicago tonight. I have the interesting honor to try to keep up with a man that's almost 78 years old, and I fail to do it on most days. So I'm glad to be stationary here to share with you from a couple of contexts. One, not just in terms of my role with Rainbow Push Coalition, but also from insights serving as a senior pastor in a neighborhood that is, I guess, ranked 53 out of 55 in Baltimore City, based on metrics and measurements where the median income right outside the doors of my church are about $18,000 per year. The life expectancy for a child born in zip code 21217 today is 20 years less than that of a child born in a different zip code in the city, not 3 good miles away, as my father would say, as the crow flies. There's an interesting thing that we're seeing in the emergence of opportunity zones or displacement on steroids that actually has a time frame by which we'll be able to measure how quickly they will move black folks out of designated spaces. Because there is a definite window of project completion, the need for us to get ready has never been greater. We don't have time to sit around and have meetings. As a pastor of a church, meetings make me itch because we tend to hypothesize, theorize, analyze, get nothing done. This is a praxis moment where we must do quick evaluation of the capacity and potential to bring stakeholder partners to the table on 2 ends. One is on the equity and investment side, the other is on the implementation side. And one of the hats that I wear is chairing the Community Relations Commission of Baltimore City, which is our civil rights oversight entity, is I have the ability to use not elected office, but delegated authorities by appointment to raise key questions about how public dollars will be used and in whose interest. We've got to look at multiple facets of how we're going to monitor the implementation of opportunity zones beyond the benefit of patient capital to sit for 10 years without there being any particular penalty, except when you look up, you will see the brightening of urban context so fast, your head won't have time to swim. Here's where the issues are, as I see some of them. Reverend Jackson often says the only thing worse than slavery is adapting to it. If we're not careful, the double edge of this sword that sounds real good to get money to places that have historically been denied access to capital is going to be problematic because the gatekeeper many times is going to be government itself. I've heard at the table, Dr. Daniels, discussions about our anchor institutions, colleges and universities, many of them public, that they themselves actually have capital dollars that are actually appropriated by the states that can be leveraged to further develop inside many of the opportunity zones where they find themselves situated, and yet we've had no collaborative conversation with the presidents of the colleges in those opportunity zones to see what their capital requests are going to be in the appropriation cycle to figure out how much other state money is going to be at our disposal so that when we bring capital partners to the table, we don't have to fill the entire gap. Not only that, part of the urban redevelopment strategy is most cities have what they call master plans. The master plan is a public document. Who's monitoring the implementation and the prioritization of how those documents are adhered to? So what I'm doing in one of my roles is I am calling for first a meeting and then potentially a public hearing with the planning director, the directors of housing and community development, to come in and talk to me and explain to me how are you going to roll out opportunity zones, and how are you going to determine which projects get the buy-in from the city by whatever process is determined. So we've got to figure out levels of engagement. We've got to have not only, we can't just put it on the mayor. As a preacher, one of the things I learned, if there's something that I really want to have said, I have a revival. Because then I get an out-of-town preacher to come say all of the stuff I bet not say, and then they get to go back and I look like it's good. I get to say what is necessary so that when we ask Mayor Baraka, when we ask the mayor of New Orleans, when we ask the incoming mayor of Chicago, there's someone else that's lending their voice. We don't have the luxury to sit by and wait for somebody to figure it out for us, because white folks will get rich again off of moving us out to places yet to be designated. Because in all of the times Detroit went bankrupt, it did not go away. I'm going to say that again. The land of Detroit did not go away. So as we're looking at this, Dr. Daniels, I think we've got to look at a couple of things: litigation and legislation. Some of this is going to require legal challenge in terms of making sure there's equitable deployment of public funds. There's also an opportunity on the legislative side that if there's any public consideration by localities, that you can then put a requirement for not just community benefits agreements. Let's change the frame. There needs to be economic inclusion. Don't benefit me, include me. I want to be a partner at the table, have equity in the deal, have a seat at the table when it comes to oversight and the implementation, and if there is any recourse to be had, I want to have a voice in how we fix the problem. Because I'm not adapting to 21st century slavery. And so I'm open to having some precise conversations about where we get. I agree with you, Dr. Daniels, if we look at 10, 15, 20 anchor cities that have residual impact, where we have density and concentration of both black people and black anchor institutions at the community level that can be pulled into the conversation, then I think we have potentially a recipe for some effectiveness and success as the Opportunity Zone process gets rolled out. If not, the next 30 months, when they start day one and the countdown begins, before you have to be out of your deal. You don't have time to assess, think about it. You got to find the projects that's going to be able to work for you and get them on the table. Otherwise, we will find ourselves. Not that gentrified ain't my problem. I'm not worried about gentrification. This next phase of displacement is going to be worse than anything we've ever seen. And with this court that is emerging, reinforcing the legalization of overt racism, with some of the most incompetent jurists named to the bench that we've ever seen in our lives. When we see potential state takeovers of city assets, where we have black executives, the failed effort of the Georgia legislature to try to take Hartsfield Airport, that Maynard Jackson spent so much of his effort trying to build as the world's busiest airport. I was an air traffic controller. I heard the assemblyman say you can't fly a plane without radar. That's how you first learn how to do air traffic control without radar. Yes, you can. If you don't know the design, you'll wait until somebody builds radar, and by the time they show you how to use it, they've used the design against your interests. So I'm open to having a collaborative conversation, and I thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. And by the way, the session 6 this afternoon, he will be in that session. Session 6 this afternoon is a very much solution-oriented session, so he'll be there to give more insights. Our final person is getting his charger, and we want him to charge us up over here. My question to Hillary Shelton, whom I've known for many, many years, I don't know why he never aspired to be the president of the NAACP. I guess he just likes to be in the esteemed Washington Bureau, which has had such great predecessors, actually. And it's to really ask him, based on what he has heard, whether or not it is, from the perspective of the NAACP and its vantage point, can we develop a national policy agenda which advances development without displacement? In other words, how do we take on, from a legislative point of view at the national level, the question of gentrification? Hillary Shelton.
No, thank you very much. Dr. Daniels, as always, I'm deeply honored to have any time to absorb all that great knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that over the years, even before my hair turned white, you would give me, and I appreciate being here as well. Just one of the things I handed out that may help you as we're thinking about the issue from a broader perspective is this document here. They were kind enough to put this out. This is an overall federal legislative agenda that addresses the issues that we're talking about, both in the broader sense, but also in a very specific sense. It's one of the things that's been very clear as I've listened to those statements before now, and certainly as I think about the NAACP itself, we have over 2,200 membership units. We're in every state in the United States, so we're hearing from our members on a regular basis of what the policy needs to look like to address the challenges they find themselves in. So in essence, every state in the country, but also we're still on military bases in Italy, Germany, Korea, and Japan, going back to our very thorough involvement with the integration of our armed services. As we're talking about these issues, we're also thinking always in three forms of government. We're dealing with everything at a local level. We've talked a lot about local governance, and it makes good sense that we're being hosted by the mayor of a major city, and there are other mayors and former mayors of cities sitting in here and other state representatives. That's important as we think about the ground level implementation. As we're thinking about things from a state level, the issue of block grants and others have been raised as well. But I think, as most of you know, block grants are not controlled by the blocks. Right. Block grants are controlled by the state governments. And so as such, as mayors struggle to put the right programs in place and have the right resources to go into those programs, they have to think about what's happening at the state level. And our organizational structure is one that focuses in on state policies as we're looking at the distribution of those funds, because as many have said in the past, it's our money. As we're thinking about that also, we're thinking about what's happening in Washington and the multi-trillion-dollar budgets that are being dispensed as we talk about many of the issues that have been raised here as well. My job within that overall structure is to handle those issues that happen at the federal level. But that means I have to be informed of what's going on, where the fights are at the state level, as well as how effective and not we're being at the local ground level. So if you look at this document, you'll see the actual legislative agenda to accomplish those responsibilities. So you see, if you look at the document, the second box of bills that are pending are all bills that are pending under the auspices of economic justice and labor. So as we're thinking about everything from infrastructure growth, development projects along those lines, believe it or not, even as much as I have to hold my nose and check my back for knives coming out of it, I've been in this White House to talk about those issues, because that budget is going to begin in this White House. It always does. The federal budget begins, the White House is sent down to the House, the Senate, it is reviewed, amendments are added, and the budget is then put together with emphasis on issues that the president has influenced, but also those in the Congress. That's why we're delighted with the outcome of the last election. As we're saying, even though it didn't give us everything we wanted, it put us in a much more advantageous posture than we've been in since Barack Obama left office. So in essence, our structure there, as we're thinking about things in that context, is we've got a House that is now moving us in the right direction as well. It helps us, as we're thinking about our policy agenda, that we have Maxine Waters chairing the Financial Services Committee. And you should give her a huge hand, because quite frankly, the repeal of one of the most important protections that will provide us not only with what we need to make sure that as we're moving in these economic areas, we're not being screwed in the process, was the creation of something through a bill called the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill, where we watched African Americans, as we moved to achieve so much, lose so much by 2008. For those of you who weren't paying attention, the most important form of wealth, I'm not talking about just riches, I'm talking about money that brings more money. Wealth is home ownership. It still is. But we watched what happened in 2008 as over half of African Americans lost their homes, and as such, we lost 1/2 of all of our wealth. So it's moving to move forward on these issues, to actually grow what we need to grow to make America look like what it should look like as we think about those constitutional promises. At the same time we're trying to move forward, we're having this taken away from us at the bottom line. And it's important as civil rights is. After all, I work for the nation's oldest and largest grassroots-based civil rights organization. If we're going to address the issue of gentrification, we have to also think about civil rights in a way that we've never thought about it before. So thinking about those resources coming in and the pipelines in which they come into our communities, we're very thoughtful. about issues of education and those resources that come out of the Department of Education, and how, quite frankly, if you really want to be afraid, look at the budget that just came out of the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos, and the privatization now of our public schools to a point that they're going to have to produce an income. I don't want to draw too much to this, but let me just put this on the line as well. Let me begin by saying sometimes I do get a little paranoid about it, but it don't mean I ain't informed. I understand the realities of what we're dealing with, and as the saying goes, just because I'm paranoid don't mean they're not out to get us. As we look at that budget, what we're seeing is the undercutting they're doing of our public schools and even programs like Title I that are based on the income, those children that are actually eligible for things like school lunch programs is actually being undercut as well. And Betsy DeVos's husband, by the way, I don't want to spend too much on time, so I'm going to drop this point on you and leave it, is the heir to the Amway fortune, owns a hedge fund company that is, I would say, almost uniquely responsible for the real problems we've had in Detroit with charter schools that are being utilized as a substitute for our public schools. But I'll set that aside for just a minute and say the bills that we're working on are outlined here. And would love to talk a little bit more about not only those economic issues, but also as we're thinking about gentrification, we're thinking about housing. And one of the most important tools that we were able to put in place under the Obama administration, there was an attachment to the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill, was the Low and Moderate Income Housing Trust Fund that creates billions of dollars of resources for our communities. We were able to put the right things in place to make sure that money would be released as it had been done under Obama. However, the repeal or rescission is underway right now. What we were able to do is tie it directly to GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That meant we didn't have to go back to the government and ask for an appropriations to come up with the money. The money was already flowing in, and quite frankly, we put a very esteemed U.S. congressman from North Carolina to be the head of the FHFA that's responsible for its disbursement. And that was a guy by the name of Mel Watt. It was not a coincidence that we put someone like a Mel Watt that understood these issues in those positions. In other words, what it goes back to in a shorthand is we're putting both the plan on the ground that ends up being looked at as a number of different pieces of legislation that address a number of issue areas. I mentioned just a couple, but there are many more as we think about small business. Now those resources are going to go into our communities and how that's going to be made available to our folks through a number of means, including the utilization of block grants once again. So to think about issues in those terms, we're thinking about those bills that we need to get through. We're testifying before the Banking Committee. We're testifying before the House Financial Services Committee, even as we're addressing some of the broader issues that do have an impact too. You can't talk about these issues without some implications around issues of the criminal justice system. Because as we believe it's supposed to be utilized in Kichi Taifa, it's supposed to be utilized to provide security and protection in our neighborhoods. In too many issues, it's utilized to actually enforce segregation policies that are too much a part of our landscape. As you begin talking about some of the issues and challenges, even in Alabama, it's important we're thinking about those things in those terms. And that's why there are a number of bills here that address those concerns as well. As to thinking about public education, we want to make sure there are more resources directly for public education that is not dependent upon a relationship with a private profit-making entity whose primary concerns is not whether our children are successful in matriculating through our schools, but is concerned about whether in the process of them matriculating, they're getting paid. So in essence, if we go to the educational component, that is the bills that are at the bottom of this page, you'll see a number of pieces of legislation begin addressing the issues of actually strengthening the framework around our public schools, but also to think about sitting here in this fine institution of higher education, the protection of our HBCUs, making sure that we have the resources for our children to be able to take advantage of these schools as well. For those of you who may have gray hair about like mine, you'll remember that as I attended Howard University, I won't go into the year right now. If you pull me aside, I'll tell you. It was a Pell Grant that actually paid all of my tuition. It paid all of my tuition. I had to take out loans to pay for things like room and board, books, food, and those things along those lines. But at the very least, the integrity of our government is one that said that that higher education is important, and even if your mom and dad's pocketbook won't cover it, we'll make sure that the collective resources that are in our federal coffers, that we call the taxes that we pay and the programs that we're paying for, are very much in place. So all that's to say, we're just excited about having this kind of meeting, because it is so many different pieces. And I'm listening to people talking about the various pieces, and every single one of those is extremely important. Professor Harris, so we're looking at and thinking about these concerns. We know that we have to work out a way to fit them all together, which is kind of what we do at the NAACP. I'm on my way actually to do a training. I'll be leaving this afternoon. Apologize, I can't stay through the whole thing. But we are actually training and educating our people in preparation for the rest of these fights that we're going to have in each of these issue areas, as we've divided them up through our organization and through various committees. Every single branch has an education committee, has a economic justice and labor committee, has a housing committee, has committees that are focused in on the various pieces that make up a comprehensive strategy that we're convinced we absolutely have to stick to if we're going to be successful here. So I hope that you'll take a further look, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have along these lines, and looking at the full agenda. I included two other things, just want to point to your attention as well. Accountability is important as we're having this fight, Ron. We want to make sure that those that are put into position to carry out these responsibilities at every single level in this process are doing it right. And that's why, wherever you're from, we've graded all 435 voting members of the House of Representatives and all 100 voting members of the U.S. Senate on how they're responding to these issues. Now, these are people that work for us, and let me just say that not one of them makes under $178,000 a year. And that's pretty good money, but that's just to begin things. If you look at what they're making on top of that, you won't be surprised as to why it is that we have more billionaires that are serving in this administration than any other time in history, and how every single one of them has a direct connection to their hands being in the pot. Even those that said, as they were running for president, I'm thinking about Rick Perry for a minute here, that if he became president of the United States, the first thing he would do is get rid of the Department of Energy, which is also very important in our policy positions. And what he did, of course, was be made the Secretary of Energy, overseeing many of those issues and concerns as well, knowing that if you can't get rid of it, we're going to make it work the way we want for the people who we want it to work for. So all this, again, my long way of saying, please take a look at that. And finally, we'd love everyone to be on top of these issues, be in the know just as we are. We have a memorandum of understanding with each and every one of the historically black fraternities and sororities, with all of our social groups, from the Links to Jack and Jill, believe it or not, to all of our historically black churches throughout the country at the national level. We are tied in and coordinating this work as we're looking forward to coordinating with every single organization sitting around this table, both in terms of what was set forward in our agenda, but also knowing that no one knows what's going on back home better than those that are from home and living at home. And that we're looking for that input as we're moving this through as well. So comprehensively, piece by piece, the mosaic of policies that have to be put in place, so the overall vision of what America looks like if we get it right is very much in place. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. We now want to turn to the mayor, but before I do that, I took my cue from my revolutionary brother, Charles Barron. I forgot I need to make sure that I can get home too. So I just want to introduce the First Lady of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, Mary France Daniels. Like Roy Jones said, you must have forgot. Anyway, now we're privileged to, and Mayor, I know it's been a long conversation. It's lots of pieces to it and lots of voices, but we now, want to hear from you. Any questions, your observations in terms of what you've heard. Now we want to hear from the Honorable Raj J. Baraka.
Thank you. Well, I just want to first thank Ron Daniels for always thinking it not robbery to be in Newark and putting this together tirelessly every single year. It is, well, every year you have it. I want to thank all of you for bringing yourselves, your folks, everybody here to Newark. We appreciate you and this conversation as well, to be in the room with greats, Reverend Wilson,
Charles Barron, folks from all over this country, Mayor Ford, thank you for being here. We have to respect the folks who came before us, brother. We just buried Mary Gibson yesterday. One of the reasons I couldn't be involved yesterday, who was the first African-American mayor of a major city in the East Coast. But before Atlanta was Gibson, right? Before, many of these places, Gibson was there first, and, we had the honor to bury him yesterday. Some of this discussion, and in this time, because this time period I'm in, reminds me a lot of, Maurice Bishop and the struggles that he had. I mean, we spend too much time trying to out-radical each other, and I think that is problematic. On his face, Maurice Bishop, who I thought was probably one of the most brilliant folks of his time in Grenada, who organized people from nothing, was attacked and overthrown by people who called themselves revolutionary. And as soon as he was overthrown, Reagan invaded Grenada, which means that nobody won but them. So it's important that, we understand, my father talked about unity and struggle, that we don't confuse people we disagree with our enemies. Because our enemies, you can agree with your enemy sometime, but you have to realize that is your enemy all the time. And you wind up disagreeing with your friends or your allies sometimes because you disagree on policy or how to get there or different things like that. And you struggle around those things, but you always agree to be unified. And we have not been sophisticated enough to do that, which is why we are losing. Because some of us might have read an extra book than the other person, and so we become more radical than that folk, and then we go back and forth with each other about that, but ultimately we want the same thing, and we have to remember that we all want the same thing. And if you didn't want the same thing, you wouldn't be in this room, unless you're the police, and I'm not talking about the local police either. I also believe that I also want to give a shout out and to say thank you to, when you get back to Jackson, to give my regards to Mayor Lumumba. And I always say, I was with Elder Lumumba in a taxi on my way to the State of Black World in D.C. When he told me he was running for mayor of Jackson that year. I was blessed enough to go to his fundraiser in New York City to give money before he actually won. And the year after that, I ran for mayor. Right, so just want to give my regards to young Antar and the work that he's doing down there. And I want to push back against what you said about, Jackson. The peculiar and very important thing about Jackson, Mississippi is they was in government before there was the government. Right? So that's a model that most of us don't have. We don't have that model, meaning we weren't organized in government before we got to government. So it means that we're spending a lot of our time trying to organize in government, right? Which makes it a little bit more difficult because you already had a structured organization in place when you moved into power, right? And those people came with you, and I could see that listening to you. And that is a tremendous leap. Trust me, because one of the biggest problems you have in government is personnel. Trying to get people you can trust and people who agree with you at the same time. Because sometimes you get people who you agree with, who you can't trust, and people who you can trust who just ideologically incompatible with you. And so trying to figure that out. I want to say we have to look at this thing scientifically. So everybody is not at the same stage, right, in the development of what we're doing here. Newark, Jackson, East Palo Alto, places like that are not New York. Chicago, Atlanta, we are not these places. Those places are much more developed. They have huge amounts of wealth. Cities like ours, and I was listening to the sister talk about Jackson, I was like, that's Newark. Cities like ours have been purposefully disinvested in. The tax base has been removed completely. So you got whole swaths of land. So over 70% of the people in Newark are renters, right? Almost half of them pay 30% of their income on housing, like you said, right? We just took our school board back from the state. So the same things you're saying is the same things that happen in the city. So our struggle is we're trying to get wealth, right? Because it's two fights that I learned. It's a fight for democracy. That means that, you know, we have the right, since you got us here, we have the right to have what everybody else has. We didn't ask to be here. You brought us here. Now we have the right to have what everybody, whatever is being passed out, we want it passed out to us too, right? So meaning that we have a right to democracy, then a right to self-determination. So here's the thing. You can't have self-determination with no resources. You can't do it. It's impossible. You can say you want to determine what happens in your house all you want, but if you don't have no money for food, then you have to go to the bread line. Right? You can say you want to teach your kids specific things if you want, but if you don't control the curriculum in the schools, you got to go get what they're giving to everybody else in the public school system. Right? So the idea is to try to control democratically the democratic process, but also have some self-determination at the same time. So there's a couple of things. Gentrification is huge, right, in cities, and it looks different in different places. Let me just say that, right? Because when there's no downtown area, when it has been abandoned for 30, 40, 50 years, and people begin to develop, and there was nobody living there, and people begin to live in there, nobody is being displaced from there because nobody was there, right? But it does not mean that displacement won't come as a result of it. Right? Because those forces are going to cause displacement eventually. So you have to prepare yourself for that before it begins. And so when places like New York and Chicago and San Francisco that's struggling try to implement things like inclusionary zoning, it becomes almost antithetical, because at the end of the day, Assemblyperson pointed out, the area median income is already too high. Because people have already moved in, and you've started too late, so the forces of development the market forces have already taken place. New York is so powerful, its market affects all of the markets around New York City. So everywhere it goes. So if affordable housing in New York is $3,000 a month in Manhattan, if it's $3,000 to $4,000 a month, that's affordable, then all of those folks, even people, lower middle class folks or working people like teachers, entry-level cops, school-age kids, college kids, can't afford that, so they find other places, Jersey City, Bayonne, Harrison, then Newark, because the prices are going to go down and down and down, so it affects that market. So whatever we was charging in Newark for $500, the landlord now says, I could charge $1,200 and get those folks from New York City who can't pay the $3,000, now I could charge them $1,200 to live downtown. So it affects the market, right? And so there's a few things that we try to put in place. One, we're waiting for the state to pass the land bank ordinance, because we're going to put a land bank together in Newark where we can begin to control our own property, right? Control it in such a way we designate to whom we want to designate to, and have a land trust. So a land trust is not a land bank. The land trust helps us to identify parts of the city and say, we're going to take this part and make it affordable in perpetuity, right? Or we're going to take this part and make it a farm, or we're going to take this part and make it, and that's what you have to do. And these forces take time, because we're not in charge by ourselves. You do know this. So these things take time. And then part of the stuff that we're not talking about is ownership and cooperatives, right? So we have to establish ownership. You have to encourage the people in the community to buy the property while it's cheap. Now, today, not wait until after they rally and other people come in and fuss about it. Do the rally, but buy the property, right? You have to buy the resources. You have to control, because can't nobody put you out of something you own, right? You have to own the homes, you have to own the retail, you have to buy the business. So we have steady monthly meetings, men's and women's meetings where we encourage the people to buy property, and we engage them through pipelines to get them to get the property actively. We do this purposefully and deliberately because we believe that that's what should happen, right? And then about a month ago, we passed Right to Counsel. Now you got people outside saying, fund Right to Counsel, arguing, oh, you need to fund the Right to Counsel. Well, you wouldn't even have a Right to Counsel if we didn't do it, right? And now we're trying to get the money together to be able to fund it, which will be active this year. Why is that important? Because most people are being illegally evicted, right? Or they go to court with no lawyer, and the lawyer goes on the other side and with some cockamamie stuff and kicks them out so they can raise the rents. And then you have to have a strong rent control ordinance, right? And we have one of the strongest rent controls in the country. The rent control ordinance here is based on CPI. So at the end of the day, you can't raise the rent unless the consumer price goes up at all. You can't raise the rent. And sometimes it don't go up, right? So you can't raise it. And you only can raise the rent if you make substantial improvements to the property that is not about painting or fixing the elevator or fixing the radiator. You have to if you put a pool in there, then maybe you can raise the rent, right? But if it ain't no pool put in there, if you didn't put nothing additional to what's going on, then you can't raise the rent. And then we have a rent control board that you have to go to get permission to raise the rent in the first place. I mean, that's part of it. And then, in Newark, we do have inclusionary zoning, but ours go as low as 40% of the AMI. So it's 80, 60, and 40% of the AMI dictated by the city. Plus, the city has a right to say, we don't want the affordability in this property here. We want to take the money and put it in our affordable housing trust fund. We want to take, and we want you to develop, we're going to use your money to develop housing in other parts of the city, or take a project that a minority developer is using somewhere else where they have a significant gap in their project to get finished, to fill that gap. And because we filled that gap, we have to, all of the housing has to be affordable in it. We being as creative as possible to do that. Why? Because most people don't want to live downtown. And so we have this struggle about what's happening downtown. Well, my people don't live downtown. They live in the South Ward, in the West Ward. They live in the communities. They want their neighborhoods to look better. That's what they want. They want their neighborhood to look better. They just want, they would choose to live there if they didn't get robbed when they came out their house, or if it wasn't a vacant lot next to them with rodents, or if there was 3-4 abandoned properties that they lived next to at the same time. They want that stuff developed, and they want it to look decent, right? They want it to be nice. So it's up to us to get the wealth to be able to invest in those properties and build them, and then encourage local folks to build it ourselves. You can't get a subsidy in Newark, an abatement in Newark, unless you have a minority co-developer. Not a subcontractor, a co-developer. That means that they have to have equity in the deal, from the beginning of the deal to the end of the deal. And so what we're doing is trying to educate the developers in our city to begin to understand, if they put their stuff together, these guys can't develop without you, right? So they have to come to the meeting with you sitting next to them. I was pleased to be at a meeting with 3 young African-American brothers who are developing 3 or 4 properties in the neighborhoods where we live, who was with a larger developer who was sitting there, and the dynamic of the room was such that the larger developer understood that they wouldn't be in the room if it wasn't for these guys, right? And the person that they were talking to that worked for the city was concerned about the equity agreement that they had with one another. So what's the equity agreement before we begin? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Let's get that equity agreement put together first before we move forward on this project. And that's important because we're starting from a different playing field than a lot of folks. Once World War II ended, and the government subsidized people to move in the suburbs and built 280 and 78. They took the entire tax base out of the city, and not just white folks left, everybody left, right? And so and people began to leave, and the irony of that is the public school system is funded by property taxes, right? And if there's no property that you can tax, the quality of the school system deteriorates. So they're blaming you for the conditions of the school system that they deliberately created, right? And so then they take it from you and say you didn't do a good job when they took the bottom from under you in the first place, right? And that's what happens. And they concentrated our folks in these tall buildings called projects. Right, that's what they did. Then they said, okay, that's no good. Then they destroyed the project and created scattered site housing and pushed us in poverty in different parts of the city and created zip code determinism, right? And you're stuck in these neighborhoods for the rest of your life, and the quality of your life is determined by the neighborhood you live in. And just a mile away from you, people live 5, 10 years longer than you because their life expectancy is longer because the quality of life is better than yours, just a mile away. Just in some instances, 200 yards away, 200, 300 yards away. And that's how the rest of America looks, that is not in these giant buildings and skyscrapers and beautiful, things that are going on. The rest of us in these communities are, Detroit looks like is a larger way we can look at what's happening in cities like Newark, around the country. And so we have to be as creative and imaginative as we possibly can, because one, we have to get the wealth back in our community. We have to trap it, because people they're not interested in coming to these cities. Once the interest comes again, then they want to come downtown, and if they can make money, then they spread out. So once wealth comes to your city, the trick on our part is, how do you flip that? How do you capture it, and how do you force it in other directions? The last piece I want to say in terms of the Urban Marshall Plan is that understand that even all of the things that we're doing in the city will never be enough. Inclusionary zoning will never create enough affordable housing in the city, ever. There are 20,000 people on a waiting list for affordable housing in the city now. Low-income housing, not affordable housing, in the city now, right? And that's not counting the people who are in transition from homelessness, or people who are living from check to check, right? Or paying 30% of their income on their rent or their mortgage, right? So we'll never create enough housing to do that. The wealth gap in the city, in the state, is so large. The median wealth for white families in New Jersey is $271,000. They just did it again, and it came out to be over $300,000 net median wealth of white folks in the state of New Jersey. Latinos in the state of New Jersey, net median wealth is $7,500. And the net median wealth for black families in New Jersey is $5,000. So I could do all of the progressive things I want to do in this city for 8 years. We don't have enough resources to fill that gap. We're not going to create enough co-ops, enough ownership, enough affordable housing to have a huge impact that we want to have. We're going to save some people and throw some people on a trajectory to do right. There's going to be a bunch of stories of people say I did good, and thank you to Mayor Baraka, same they say my Maynard Jackson, thank you. But the real piece of it is that we need an urban Marshall Plan. We need the billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. Some people call it reparations, right? We need it to be infused in our communities completely. It has to be on job development, has to be a job creation, has to be a small business development, creation of co-ops, infrastructure, improving of roads and bridges and water and pipes, and you take those public works projects and begin to put people to work on those public works projects. The same way they did the WPA. When they did the WPA in the United States in the 30s, we were in the order of Dixiecrats. It was still Jim Crow, so that stuff didn't affect us. When the Marshall Plan, they did that for average white families that came back from the war that affected millions of white Americans in this country, and then they took an additional amount of money and rebuilt Europe. And rebuilt Europe with that money. There has never been that significant investment in our communities that way. People in their mind think the opportunity zones is going to be that. I think that that's a tease, and we can do what we can to benefit, as Vivian talked about, to benefit if we put our tools and our fight together to be able to extract from it as much as we can extract from it. But ultimately, folks, we need to be telling these people we need an urban Marshall Plan. And you can't be with people, first of all, you can't be with people who don't believe in reparations. You can't support people who don't support you. If you don't even have the respect to say that our condition is peculiar, is different. So the system in America is already uneven, right? So that means there are people that are inherently going to be left behind already, no matter what your nationality is. You're going to be left behind because of the unevenness and the inequity already inherent in the system we're in. But we have a particular history in this country on top of that because we are African American, and we have been hurt because of that for centuries, and we need to be repaired for that. That's just factual. And so we could talk about how do we fix the inequity in the system by raising the minimum wage and doing all these other things. I'm for that. I support all of that. But we also have to talk about a huge gap, a financial and human resource that's been stolen and missing in our community that needs to be invested by this federal government. And we can't lose sight of that. And if we call it the Urban Marshall Plan or a Marshall Plan or whatever we want to call it, so it is palatable to the rest of Americans, then we need to do that. Because guess what? If they give money to us, everybody's going to benefit. Everybody's going to benefit. Everybody's going to benefit because we're going to put the money back into the economy. We're going to put the money back into the economy. We're going to build these communities, and we're going to get in the labor force, and everybody's going to benefit from that. So we need to be saying that. And I say that everywhere I go around the country. If I go someplace, I say we need an urban Marshall Plan. Without a shadow of a doubt, because I'm struggling in this town trying to be creative and imaginative to be able to push the needle forward little by little by little, but the struggle is protracted and it takes time. And guess what? We have privilege. We have privilege because everybody don't have time. And the fact that you are even in here having a debate means you got privilege. The fact that you at this university talking about this stuff means you have some type of privilege. And we have to identify the privilege that we have, because sometimes we become so radical we forget about our own privilege. So we have the right, we have the privilege to be extreme on some instances, but people got to eat today. My mother told me, and this is what changed my mind, right? My mother said, your father was an ideologist, an activist, a revolutionary. He had the privilege of ideas. Nobody asked him for a job when he went to the supermarket. When you go to the supermarket, people say, Mayor, I need a job. That's what they say. They say, I need a job. So our problems have to be solved today. Today. And people ain't gonna wait for the workers of the world to unite for you to figure it out. They're just not gonna wait for that. The people, and they don't got the time to wait for that. And anybody who wants them to wait for that has privilege. Has privilege, and you just have to realize that, right? And so that does not mean I'm against ideas. It means we have to struggle till we get to that place. We have to keep in mind, though, that there's steps, right? And it's science that's protracted. And in order for people, look, I could feed a person, give them a job, and then I'll invite them to the Rutgers seminar or the NJIT seminar, and they could debate with you about what they feel ideologically. But guess what? If they not eating, they ain't coming. If they ain't eating, they ain't showing up. If you can't feed them, they not coming to your meeting. Tell people we feeding people in here and see how crowded this place will be. And the last piece is, so we so crazy, it's people who will, it's people who will protest the meeting against gentrification instead of coming into the meeting and debating and fighting in the meeting, because it's not about progress, it's about them. It's about them. I don't got to agree with you. And you don't got to agree. That's democracy. I don't got to agree with you. I don't agree with my mother all the time, but I listen to her. We got a right to fight. We got a right to struggle. I don't have to agree with you, man. You come in here and we could debate all night. But we could still be on the same side, though. I love you completely, totally, 100%, but I don't have to agree with you. And if your demand to unite with me is that I agree with everything you say, then you're a narcissist, and I don't want to be with you anyway. I don't want to be with you anyway, right? So you didn't believe everything you believed in one day. It took you a minute to get to that point where you at. It took you a minute to get to that understanding where you at. Give this brother a chance to get to that level. Debate with him, struggle with him, bring him on in. You don't cut people off simply because it's 10 things we agree on, we got on the list. We don't agree with number 2 and number 6, and we leave and we fight one another. Well, I don't know about them. I'm number 2 and number 6, we can't get together because of those 2 things. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Congress fight all day, every day. When they get out of there, they say it's the law. They say it's the law. Now you try to break the law and see if they're going to come to court for you. They won't. And that's the point I'm making. We have to be so sophisticated around this table that we're able to debate one another, and we walk out of here, we say, I don't know, I don't agree on 4 and 5, but this is what we agree with collectively, and I support the brother around this and this and that. We have to be that sophisticated, y'all. We have to. Well, because we losing. I don't know what y'all think, but I think we getting our butts whipped out here. Because we won't unify. And I mean, that's all. So, I mean, that's all I really have. You know, there's 6 basic things that we trying to do in here. And I'm not saying, and I forgot hired by live. And I'm not saying that these things are perfect or they're 100%. I'm saying this is what we doing, right? And the hired by live is us engaging the anchors that been in this city 10 decades before I was born, and telling them, look, if you want to partner with us, you have to do 3 things. Hire Newark residents. You have to buy or procure use your procurement dollars with Newark-based businesses. And if you don't know the businesses, here's a list. Here's a list. These are the businesses. You got to buy these businesses. You got to buy. So you got corporations that are already raising their level of spend because we're forcing them to. And then the last part is live. So that means you can't just come to Newark and work here and leave. Some of your folks, they got to stay here. Some of them people got to live here. They got to stay here. And if y'all like downtown, beautiful. Hang out. We gonna come downtown, and we never lived downtown. In Newark, we didn't live downtown. I don't know about the other cities. Y'all want to live down there? That's cool. We don't have no problem with that. Create the wealth, live downtown, do whatever you want to do. We gonna build these neighborhoods where we live at, and they're gonna be the best, and they're gonna be beautiful, and we gonna make them progress. Like Brother Barron talking about East New York. People want to stay in their own community, man, and they want to go to schools across the street from their school. They just want them to be safe. They want the schools to be sharp, where people can get educated, right? And they want the housing to be nice. I'm not with fighting for low-income housing just for the sake of fighting for low-income housing. I'm not with that. I fight with people on the left in my city every day. Why? Because I can't bring myself to organize around putting people in homes that I wouldn't live in myself. Those places are dilapidated, they're rat infested, they've been overgrown and terrible for decades. Nobody's ever done anything about them, right? We have to, our people think they're supposed to live like that because that's all they got. We have to change the conditions of the way these people live, the way we live in these communities. We can't just settle for that. If you want to settle for that, good, because that's the democracy part of it, right? Here's the democracy part of it. You like those buildings? Let's switch. Because there's the privilege. Let's switch. That's all good. We can keep them up. I agree with you. Let me live in your home and in your apartment, and you live in there. And here's the best part of it. Let me pay the rent I was paying in the project in your house. And what you was getting there, you pay the rent over there, and you live over there. And see how quick you trying to walk the hell out of there and figure out how to get that place changed around. We got to talk about this thing straight ahead. And honestly, man, I mean, I argue with these people all the time because I don't believe, to me, it's racism. These people want democracy, they just don't want self-determination. Our people want self-determination. You know what they want? They don't want to live there. They fight me all. You know what? They come downtown and say, Mr. Mayor, I'm trying to get out of there. I need to move out of there. I need another apartment. I need you to. So we found ourselves taking landlords to court. We take them to court. We try to force them to keep those people up, take them out of the property, force them to rebuild the property, and then put them back in the property. We have to work with the system to be able to get these people out of this place, for them to put money in it, invest in it, rebuild it, and then allow them to keep the HAP contract or the local, or what you call the subsidy on site, so they can still afford to live in that apartment once they fix it up at the same time. And that's what we have to do, and that's what we've been doing. But it's a long, painstaking, gruesome process. It ain't easy. We ain't got no super brilliant people doing all this kind of stuff. We fighting every single day trying to do the best we can with an enemy that had 400-year head start. That's what we trying to do. And guess what I found out in this process? I can't do it by myself. Now, everybody that got all these answers that are outside talking about what they should do and could do and would do, I swear to God, I wish they came inside and began to help us do what we need to do immediately, right? As opposed, because it's easy to run your mouth. When you actually got to make your word your bond, then there's a whole nother thing, right? When you actually got to put something in progress, then there's a whole nother piece you're talking about, right? When you got to look at these people face to face and say, look, I need these jobs, I need this, you have to do this, you have to do that, and struggle with them to do what they need to do, right? Because the government, as the beautiful sister from Jackson, Mississippi said, we don't have the power. The power is in the hands of the people. Our job is to protect you. That's our job. Maybe we don't understand that. I grew up in Newark, so we had these radios. Back in the days, we used to carry them like this. Boom boxes, we called them. And you could buy one if you had the money. You just couldn't keep it if you didn't have the muscle. So you can buy it if you had the money. You walk around the neighborhood with it all you want. But in 2 days, it'll be somebody else's. So it was the political power that helped you keep that radio. And the political power in the hood was like, don't touch him. That's my man. He from here. That's political power, right? And so the political power in the side of this government is to make sure when the folks do the work that they do, we can have the authority to say, oh, you can't touch her. You can't touch him. That you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do that. Why? Because we said so. And that's what we have. That's what our power is designed to do, right? You waiting for the government to solve the problems that you already have the answers for. You have to figure out how to get these problems solved. Our job is to give you cover fire until you solve them. That's it. Thank you.
The Honorable Raj J. Baraka. All right. Now you understand why we in Newark, as we should say back in the day, right? Back in the day.